Guns aren't for women. Go try lipstick instead." Rick Dalton sneered, the whole shop roaring with laughter as Clara Hayes asked about an M1 911. Troy Miller whistled, "Grab a Hello Kitty gun. It'll match you better." Evan Cole added coldly, "A waitress couldn't shoot anyone except herself." Clara quietly accepted the outdated gun they handed her as a joke. Bang, bang, bye, bang. 5 shots ripped the bullseye, leaving them stunned. And when they clung to excuses of beginner's luck, Clara only smiled. "If it's luck, I can do it again as many times as you want." Clara stood in the middle of Rick's gun emporium, the air thick with the smell of metal and gunpowder, her hands steady on the old pistol. She'd walked in that morning because her neighborhood wasn't safe anymore. 3 break-ins in 2 weeks. One so close she'd heard the glass shatter from her 1-bedroom apartment above the diner. She didn't want trouble, just a way to sleep without jumping at every creak. But the second she stepped through the glass door, the eyes hit her like a spotlight, sharp judging, like she'd wandered into a club where she wasn't on the list. Her faded jeans hung loose. Her blue hoodie was soft from too many washes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail. No makeup, no earrings, no flash. To them, she was invisible, a nobody who didn't belong, and they made sure she knew it. Before Clara even reached the counter, a guy in a red flannel shirt, his beard flecked with gray, leaned over to his buddy and muttered, "What's she doing here? Lost her way to the thrift store." The words carried meant to sting. Another guy, wiry with a trucker hat tilted just so, chuckled and said, "Bet she's buying for her boyfriend. No way she's here for herself." Clara's jaw tightened, but she kept walking, her sneakers barely making a sound on the scuffed linoleum. She'd grown up in a world where every move was watched, every mistake a lesson. Her family, one of the richest in the country, had raised her with rules. Carry yourself with dignity. Don't show weakness. Keep your head up. So she did. Her eyes locked on the glass case of handguns, ignoring the whispers that trailed her like smoke. As Clara approached the counter, a man in a leather jacket, his hair slicked back, nudged the guy next to him and pointed at her sneakers, scuffed and worn at the toes. "Look at those shoes," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "What, you walk here from the soup kitchen?" The crowd snickered, heads turning to get a better look. Clara paused, her hand resting on her bag, her fingers brushing the frayed strap. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge the jab, but her lips pressed together just for a moment before she straightened up and kept moving. The laughter grew a low rumble that made the air feel tighter, like the room was closing in. A woman near the back, her nails painted bright red, smirked and whispered to her friend, "She's got no business here. Probably can't even afford a bullet." The words were sharp, meant to cut, and the crowd's chuckles followed Clara like a shadow. Rick Dalton, the shop owner, was sprawled behind the counter, his guts spilling over a faded polo shirt. His arms crossed like he owned the air itself. He was the kind of guy who thought his voice was the only one that mattered, his smirk a permanent fixture. He looked Clara up and down, his eyes lingering on her plain clothes, her unpolished nails. "Sweetheart, this ain't a nail salon. You sure you're in the right place?" The crowd, hunters, off-duty cops, guys who spent weekends playing soldier, burst into laughter, the sound bouncing off the walls like a ricochet. Clara didn't flinch. She set her canvas bag on the counter, the zipper worn but quiet, and asked about the M1 911. Her voice was steady like she was ordering coffee. That's when Rick hit her with the lipstick line and the room erupted. The laughter was loud, jagged, the kind that makes your chest tighten. Troy Miller, a lanky hunter with a camo cap and a grin that screamed, "Look at me," leaned against a rack of rifles, ready to pile on. "Hey, darling, they make those cute little guns for girls now. Pink grip, maybe some sparkles. Why don't you get one of those?" He whistled sharp and mocking, and the crowd roared again, feeding off his energy. Evan Cole, a local cop with a buzz cut and eyes like cold steel, stood off to the side, arms crossed over his badge. He didn't laugh, but his words cut deeper. "Stick to pepper spray. You don't got the hands for this or the legs." His voice was flat, like he was reading a verdict. And the room went quiet for a second before the laughter came back louder, meaner, like a wave crashing over her. Clara didn't say a word at first. She just looked at them, Rick, Troy, Evan, the crowd. Her eyes were calm, but there was something in them, a quiet strength that made a few guys shift uncomfortably. She picked up the M1911 Rick had shoved at her, a scratched-up relic that looked like it hadn't been fired since the 80s. It was the kind of gun they kept around for laughs, notorious for jamming, for throwing off even the cockiest shooters. Clara turned it over in her hands, checking the slide, the grip, the balance. Her fingers moved with a kind of ease that didn't match the nervous energy in the room. Then she asked, "How many rounds does this hold per mag?" Her voice was soft, like she was asking about the weather, but it carried a weight that made the air feel still. As Clara held the gun, a guy in a black tactical vest, his sunglasses perched on his head, snorted and leaned toward Rick. "Bet she doesn't even know which end the bullet comes out of," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The crowd chuckled a few, nodding their eyes, glinting with amusement. Clara's fingers paused on the M1901's grip, her thumb brushing a scratch on the metal. She didn't look up, but her shoulders squared just slightly like she was bracing for a storm. The guy kept going louder now. "Go on, sweetheart, tell us. You watched a YouTube video and think you're Rambo." The laughter swelled, and a younger guy in a baseball cap elbowed his friend, whispering, "This is going to be a train wreck." Clara's eyes flicked to the target at the end of the range, then back to the gun, her silence louder than their jeers. Rick smelled a chance to bury her. He leaned forward, his smirk widening, his voice dripping with condescension. "What, you collecting antiques now? You couldn't even that thing." He waited for her to fumble to prove him right. The crowd leaned in, their phones half raised, ready for the moment she'd crash. Clara didn't bite. She tilted her head just a fraction and said, 7-round mag can be extended to 830 ft per secchi velocity, moderate recoil." The words came out smooth, like she had said them 1,000 times, like they were part of her. The shop went quiet. A guy in the back coughed into his fist. Troy's grin slipped just for a second. Evan's arms dropped to his sides, his badge catching the light. Rick blinked, then forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "What, you read that on the internet last night? Google's not going to help you shoot." The air shifted, like the room was holding its breath. "Hey, if this story is hitting you, maybe you felt that moment when a room turns on you, when you're judged before you even open your mouth. Can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep sharing these stories, to connect with you through them. All right, let's get back to Clara." The crowd wasn't ready to let her off. Troy stepped forward, all swagger, pulling a Glock from the display case like he was auditioning for an action movie. "All right, little lady. Let's see you back that talk up. I'll shoot 5 rounds all in the 9 ring. You think you can match that?" He didn't wait for an answer, just strode to the indoor range at the back of the shop, his boots loud on the concrete. The crowd trailed behind him, a pack of wolves smelling a kill. Evan followed, his steps heavier, his voice like gravel. "Miss more than half, and you should stick to washing dishes at that diner." The crowd hooted, phones out now, screens glowing as they angled for the best shot of Clara's failure. As Troy took his shots, the crowd cheered his bullets, hitting the 9 ring with practiced ease. He turned back, his grin wide, tossing the Glock onto the counter like a challenge. Clara picked up the M1911 again, her fingers brushing the worn grip. A man in a denim jacket, his face flushed from the excitement, called out, "Don't cry when you miss, sweetheart. We'll get you a tissue." The crowd laughed, a few clapping, their voices overlapping in a chorus of mockery. Clara's hand tightened on the gun just for a moment before she relaxed, her face unreadable. She stepped to the firing line, her sneakers scuffing the concrete, and raised the gun. A guy in the back muttered, "She's going to drop it." And the laughter spiked, sharp and cruel. Clara's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on the target, her silence a wall against their noise. Rick handed her the M1911 again, his smirk back in place, sharper now. "Here, princess, try not to hurt yourself." The gun was a joke. "It's trigger sticky, it's barrel worn." Everyone in the shop knew it was a setup, a way to make her look foolish. Clara took it without a word. Her hands shook just for a second as she loaded the magazine, the rounds clicking into place. The crowd noticed, and the whispers started. "She's nervous, going to choke. This will be hilarious." Clara stepped up to the firing line, her sneakers scuffing the concrete. She didn't bother with a textbook stance. She didn't square her shoulders like they taught in classes. She just raised the gun, her eyes locked on the target. Her breathing so steady you could have set a metronome to it. 5 shots rang out sharp and clean. Bang, 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 bang. The target slid back on its track, and the crowd leaned in, waiting for the punchline, but the holes were there, clustered tight in the bullseye. Not a single one outside the center. The shop went silent, like someone had sucked the air out of the room. Troy's mouth hung open, his camo cap tilted back. Evan's jaw twitched, his eyes narrowing. Rick squinted at the target, then at Clara, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle that didn't add up. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, finally crossing his arms over his chest. "A happens sometimes." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some looking at each other, unsure what to make of it. Clara set the gun down slow and careful, like she was placing a glass on a table. She looked at Rick, her face calm, her eyes steady. "If it's luck, then I can repeat it. As many times as you like." Her voice was soft, but it cut through the murmurs like a knife. A guy in the back, heavy-set with a beard, let out a low whistle, his phone lowering. Another shifted his weight, his boots scuffing the floor. Troy wasn't having it. He stepped forward, his face red, his voice loud. "No way, you cheated. Someone rigged that target." The crowd stirred some, agreeing, some hesitating, their laughter thinner now like they weren't sure anymore. Before Clara could respond, a man with a goatee and a hunting vest pushed through the crowd, his phone raised high. "I got it all on video," he bragged, waving the screen like a trophy. "This is going viral. Waitress thinks she's a sharpshooter." The crowd laughed, but it was uneven, some glancing at Clara unsure. He kept going, his voice loud, taunting. "What's next? You going to tell us you're in the movies?" Clara's fingers paused on her bag, her eyes flicking to the phone, then back to the man. She didn't speak, but her gaze was steady, unyielding, like a warning. The man faltered, his grin slipping, and he lowered the phone, muttering, "Whatever. Let's see her choke again." The crowd's laughter was softer now, like they could sense something shifting, something they couldn't quite name. Clara didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just tilted her head, her eyes steady on Troy. "Got a harder test?" The question was simple, but it landed like a challenge. Quiet but heavy. The crowd went quiet again, the air thick with anticipation. Rick, still trying to save face, walked over to a locked case in the corner, his steps deliberate, his smirk shaky. He pulled out a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, a monster of a gun heavy enough to make most guys in the room hesitate. "All right, hot shot," he said, heaving it onto the counter with a thud. "Let's see you handle this. Most men can't even lift it." His voice was loud, but there was a crack in it, like he wasn't as sure as he wanted to sound. The crowd laughed again, but it was different now. Nervous, uneven, like they could feel the ground shifting under them. They followed as Clara carried the rifle to the outdoor range, her steps slow but steady, the Barrett's weight pulling at her shoulder. The gun was nearly as long as she was tall, and the crowd jeered as she set it up. "She's going to fall over," one guy shouted, his voice high with excitement. "Bet she can't even aim it," another added, his phone raised to catch the moment she'd fail. Clara didn't respond. She lay down on the ground, her movements smooth, practiced, like she'd done this 1,000 times. She adjusted the scope in seconds, her fingers moving with a precision that made a few guys in the crowd go quiet. As Clara set up the Barrett, a woman in a floral dress, her sunglasses pushed up on her head, leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for Clara to hear, "She's just showing off. Probably practiced this once and thinks she's a pro." The crowd snickered a few, nodding, their phones still recording. Clara's hand paused on the scope, her fingers brushing the adjustment knob. She didn't look at the woman, but her lips twitched just for a second, like she was swallowing something bitter. The woman kept going, her voice sharp. "Girls like her always want attention. Bet she's never even held a real gun before." The crowd's laughter spiked, but Clara's focus stayed on the rifle, her movements deliberate, her silence louder than their words. The trigger pull was heavy, the recoil a beast. But when she fired, the boom was deafening, a shockwave that made half the crowd flinch. 1,000 meters away, the target exploded, the bullseye obliterated, shards of paper fluttering in the wind. The laughter died. Evan's police cap slipped from his hand, hitting the dirt with a soft thud. Troy's face went pale, his camo cap suddenly looking childish out of place. Rick stood frozen, his mouth half open, his hands gripping the counter. Clara stood up, brushing the dust off her jeans with slow, deliberate swipes. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge their silence. She just handed the rifle back to Rick and said, "Anything else?" Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the air feel heavy, like a storm was coming. Evan was the first to break the quiet, his voice shaky, almost accusatory. Who are you, really?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, like he was trying to see through her to find the trick. Troy, still clutching his phone, started scrolling, his thumbs moving fast, his face tight with concentration. He stopped, his eyes widening, and held up the screen. It was a photo of Clara, younger in a military uniform. Her face serious, but unmistakable, her eyes the same steady calm they were now. "She was in the army," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably just a nurse or something." The crowd latched onto it, their laughter coming back, but it was thinner, less certain, like they were grasping at straws. "Yeah, women don't fight," one guy said, his voice sharp. "Probably just carried bandages," another added, nodding like he had cracked the code. As Troy waved his phone, a man in a plaid shirt, his belt buckle gleaming, stepped forward, his voice booming with false confidence. "Army or not, she's still just a waitress. Bet she fetched coffee for the real soldiers?" The crowd chuckled, clinging to the insult like a lifeline. Clara's hand rested on her bag, her fingers brushing the zipper, slow and deliberate. She didn't look at him, but her posture shifted, her back straighter, her chin lifting just enough to make him pause. He kept going, his voice louder. "What, you gonna tell us? You were saluting generals? Come on, sweetheart. Stick to pouring coffee." The laughter was weaker now, but it still stung. Clara's eyes flicked to the floor just for a moment before she lifted them again, steady and unyielding. Rick leaned in, his smirk back, but wobbling like he was trying to convince himself. "Logistics, maybe, no glory. You learned to shoot from some boyfriend at the range, right?" His voice was loud, but it cracked at the end, betraying him. Clara didn't answer right away. She reached into her pocket, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was pulling a card from a deck. She pulled out a small metal case, flipped it open, and set it on the counter with a soft click. Inside was a silver star, metal, its surface catching the light. Her name engraved on the back in sharp, clear letters. The shop went quiet again, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. Clara sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was a sniper. 63 confirmed kills." She closed the case, slipping it back into her pocket. "I never wanted to boast. I just wanted a gun to protect myself." After everything, the crowd didn't laugh this time. Evan's face drained of color, his hands clenched at his sides, his badge suddenly feeling like a toy. He was a cop, trained, respected, but Clara's record made his whole career look small, insignificant. Troy stared at his phone, the photo still on the screen, his bravado gone, his shoulders slumping. Rick tried to say something, but his voice caught and he just coughed, his face red. The other customers looked away, their phones lowering, their whispers fading into nothing. Clara stood there, her canvas bag still on the counter, her face calm, but her eyes distant, like she was seeing something far away, something none of them could touch. A woman in the crowd, older, with a tight perm and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, spoke up, her voice sharp, like she was trying to claw back some control. "Well, society's never going to accept a female killer. You know that, right?" She crossed her arms, her purse dangling from one elbow, her lips pursed. Troy nodded, his voice low but bitter. "You just make men feel ashamed. That's all this is." Evan didn't look at her, but he muttered, his voice barely audible. "If this gets out, you'll be hunted. People don't like women like you." The crowd stirred, some nodding, some looking uneasy, their confidence crumbling. Clara didn't respond. She just picked up her bag, her fingers slow on the zipper, her eyes still far away, like she was somewhere else entirely. As Clara lifted her bag, a man in a cowboy hat, his boots polished to a shine, stepped forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "So you got a medal. Big deal. Probably handed out like candy to make the army look good." The crowd murmured some, nodding, desperate to hold on to their narrative. Clara's hand paused on the strap, her fingers tightening just for a second before she slung the bag over her shoulder. She didn't look at him, but her eyes flicked to the counter where the metal case had sat moments before. The man kept going, his voice louder like he was trying to rally the room. "What, you think? You're some kind of hero? Heroes don't hide in diners." The laughter was sparse, but it was there, and Clara's steps slowed, her sneakers scuffing the floor, her silence a weight that made the room feel smaller. Then the door swung open, and the sound of heavy boots filled the shop, sharp and deliberate. A group of men in dark suits walked in, their faces serious, their movements precise, like they'd done this 100 times. The leader, a tall man with gray at his temples and a jaw like granite, stopped in front of Clara and saluted, his hand snapping to his forehead. "Captain Hayes," he said, his voice clear and firm, cutting through the silence like a blade. "We've been looking for you for 2 years." The crowd froze. Rick's jaw dropped, his hands falling to his sides. Troy's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the floor, the screen still glowing with Clara's photo. Evan stepped back, his badge catching the light, suddenly heavy on his belt. The agent handed Clara a sealed envelope, its edges crisp, its weight undeniable. "The government needs you back. Classified mission. You're the only one who can do it." Clara took the envelope, her face unreadable, her finger steady as she held it. She didn't open it, just tucked it into her bag, the zipper closing with a soft rasp. She looked at the agent, then at the crowd, her eyes steady but not cruel, not gloating. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she said, her voice soft but clear, like a bell in the quiet. She turned and walked toward the door, the agents falling in, stepped behind her, their boots loud on the linoleum. The crowd parted, nobody saying a word, nobody daring to meet her eyes. Rick tried to speak, his voice hoarse, cracking. "Clara, She didn't stop, didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and the shop felt smaller, emptier, like the air had been sucked out of it. As the door clicked shut, a man in a green jacket, his face flushed with embarrassment, muttered to his friend, "We didn't know." How were we supposed to know? The words were quiet, but they carried, and a few heads turned, their eyes darting away from the door. Clara's absence left a void, and the crowd's bravado crumbled, their laughter replaced by uneasy whispers. A younger guy in a hoodie, his phone still in his hand, shook his head and said, "Man, we messed up." The woman with the tight perm clutched her purse tighter, her lips pursed, her eyes fixed on the floor. The shop felt colder now. The guns on the walls suddenly lifeless, their shine dulled by the weight of what had just happened. The fallout came fast, like a storm nobody saw coming. Rick's shop took a hit when a video of the incident, someone in the crowd had posted it online, went viral. By the next morning, it had thousands of views, then tens of thousands. Customers stopped coming, their trucks no longer filling the gravel lot outside. His main supplier called 2 days later, citing reputational damage, and cut him off. Rick stood behind the counter, staring at the empty shop. His polo shirt wrinkled, his smirk gone. Troy's hunting buddies turned on him after his comments hit social media, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. His sponsorship with a local gear company was gone by the end of the week, his camo cap left on a shelf, untouched. Evan got a call from his chief, who'd seen the video. "You're off patrol until we sort this out," the chief said, his voice cold. Final. Evan sat in his cruiser that night, staring at his badge, the weight of it heavier than ever. The crowd, the ones who'd laughed and jeered, scattered like leaves in the wind. Some deleted their social media accounts when the video spread, their faces caught in the background, their laughter now a liability. Others stayed quiet, avoiding the shop, avoiding each other. The woman with the tight perm was seen at the diner a week later, her purse clutched tight, her eyes darting away when Clara's name came up. Nobody mentioned her name out loud, but it hung in the air heavy, undeniable, like a truth they couldn't unsee. Clara didn't come back to the shop. She didn't need to. Her life moved on, quiet but steady like it always had. The agents took her to a black SUV waiting outside, its engine idling, its windows tinted dark. She climbed in without a word, her bag on her lap, the envelope inside it unopened but heavy. She'd spent years trying to leave that life behind. To be just a waitress, just a neighbor, just a woman who didn't have to prove herself every day. She had traded her uniform for a hoodie, her medals for a quiet life. But the world had a way of pulling her back, of reminding her who she was. Years ago, she'd stood in a different place, a desert wind stinging her face, a rifle in her hands. The sun was low, painting the sand red, and a convoy rolled by, its dust cloud thick. A voice crackled on her radio, calm but urgent. "Take the shot!" She did, and the world shifted. The sound of the rifle echoing in her ears. That was the first of 63. She didn't talk about it, didn't carry it like a trophy. The medal in her pocket, the one she never showed anyone, was proof enough. She'd walked away from that life, from the salutes and the missions, because she wanted something smaller, something hers. But the world didn't let go so easily. As Clara's SUV pulled away, a man in a flannel shirt, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, stood outside the shop, watching the taillights fade. He kicked at the gravel, his head low, and muttered to himself, "She didn't even blink. Not once." His friend, leaning against the truck, nodded, his voice quiet. "We thought she was nothing. Man, we were wrong." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret, as the shop's neon sign flickered behind them. Inside, the crowd had thinned, but the weight of Clara's presence lingered like a shadow they couldn't shake. The guns on the walls, once symbols of power, now seemed small, insignificant in the face of what they had witnessed. Back in the shop, the silence lingered long after she left. The crowd didn't laugh anymore. They didn't look at each other. They just stood there, staring at the floor, the counter, the guns on the wall. Clara's shots still echoed in their heads, each one a reminder of how wrong they'd been. She didn't need to say it. She didn't need to gloat. Her truth was louder than their words, heavier than their laughter. And for everyone watching this, everyone who's ever been looked down on, judged, or told they didn't belong, you know that feeling. You know what it's like to stand in a room full of eyes and feel invisible. You weren't wrong for being there. You weren't alone in that moment. Clara carried her truth quietly, but it spoke for her, and it's speaking for you now. Wherever you're watching from, leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.